Today's session is Amplifying Equitable Civic Engagement in Cleveland's Neighborhoods. This talk is being recorded and will be available on our website. I am Colleen Gilson, Vice President of CDC Advancement for Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. A special thank you to my partner, Melinda Gigante, Senior Manager of CDC Advancement, and Pam Fine of Janus Small Associates for organizing today's event. Thank you also to the Progress Institute Steering Committee for your input and support as we plan these activities and offerings for CDC practitioners and our community partners. We are excited to have Erika Anthony, my friend, as moderator of today's discussion. Erika is a proud native New Yorker, the current Clevelander, and she is the Executive Director of the Ohio Transformation Fund. OTF is a collaborative fund developed by national and local funders advocating for healthy communities and an equitable democracy across Ohio. Prior to OTF, Erika served as Vice President of Government Relations and Strategy for Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. In that role, she was responsible for leading and shaping the policy and advocacy agenda, as well as fostering the fund development, racial equity and inclusion, and equitable civic engagement strategies. She is also the co-founder of Cleveland Votes and Hat Cleveland. Erika holds an undergraduate degree in psychology from the Pennsylvania State University and a master's of public administration from the Maxine G. Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State. Joining Erika as panelists today are an esteemed group of highly dedicated and deeply talented community development professionals. They are Joy Johnson, Executive Director of Burten Carr, Kristian Hunter, Community Engagement Manager for Greater Collinwood Development Corporation, Krystal Sierra, Economic Development Specialist with Greater Collinwood Development Corporation, Scott Rosenstein, Community Involvement Manager at Tremont West, Dharma Valentin, Community and Equity Organizer at Tremont West, and Jeremy Taylor, Director of Community Involvement with Detroit Shoreway Community Development. Please keep yourself on mute through the discussion to avoid background noise and interference, but we do encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation. It is my pleasure to turn the floor or the screen over to Erika Anthony.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colleen. Sorry, I had to drop a little bit of shade in the chat when Colleen said the Pennsylvania State University. You know, as a person that is married to a native Ohioan, you can only imagine what football season looks like for us in our home. So just a little friendly shade. You know, I have much love for Ohio, having been here now for nearly 15 years. Really an honor to be back with my homies from CMP. I see lots of familiar names here participating in this progress talk, and really honored to moderate this conversation with comrades who are activating around the census and the election. So I'm just going to take a few moments just to contextualize this moment that we're all living in. What I have said often this year is that we, did not have a choice in living through a pandemic. I think many of you were like me, like, oh, this is a thing. Okay, we'll figure it out. And then the days went by, and then the weeks went by, and then the months have gone by. To see how our community has responded in this moment is what gives me hope. There's a lot of things I can be sad about. There's a lot of things I can be mad about. There's a lot of things I can be angry about, but that is not why we are here today. If you want to have that conversation, meet me on my porch for some adult beverages, and we can talk about all those other emotions. But today we're here to highlight and uplift the energy that I have the honor to pay witness to almost on a daily basis from your fellow colleagues who are operating and activating for, again, the census and election. But I think it's important to contextualize that this year, while it has been challenging to do this work, and we'll hear from our CDC partners as to how they've done that, this is not unique in the sense that we need to embed equitable civic engagement into our daily practice. And I know we have a myriad of organizations that are represented here today. And I think it's important for me just to remind folks, you know, Cleveland Votes is a nonpartisan democracy building and mobilization entity. We aim to strengthen civic muscle and power to ensure that we have a more informed, participatory, and cohesive community. So how ironic that we're having this conversation today, where one of the ways that folks can be informed is by participating and watching debates. And we have probably one of the most important ones kicking off this evening right here in the city of Cleveland. But we want to make sure that this moment translates beyond this upcoming election or this upcoming deadline for the census, which we'll talk about here in a moment, and really understand how we can all, as individuals, as representation for our respective organizations, think thoughtfully about how this is not additive, but embedded in what we do on a daily basis. CMP and the fellow CDCs and many of you, at the core of what you do is serving on behalf of the residents of this community. Just like we expect accountability from our elected officials who we elect into office, we also have taken on that responsibility in our respective roles, and it's not something to be taken lightly. It's very important. We are the trusted messengers in our community, and we have to understand that in the midst of that, there is historical and systemic racism that impedes much of our progress or has impeded much of our progress. So having a race-based lens to how we do this work, one, requires that we ourselves acknowledge that racism is a thing, despite what fake news may say. And we're going to stay very nonpartisan because I don't want to violate any rules, but that is a reality, that racism is embedded in the fabric of our country. Therefore, the ways in which we do this work have to reflect that and have to be attentive to the authenticity that each of us bring. Jennifer, Devontae, Krystal, and I often say, we humbly enter this work in partnership. We're not experts. We are actively learning with each of you. If we had the roadmap or the cliff notes or, the 10 steps to eradicating racism, as Mordecai and I have often said in presentations, like a lot of us would be a little less stressed, right? So all that we do is really prototyping and experimenting, because there is no 10 steps to how to, effectively activate our community. But the trust is where it starts. The relationships is where it starts. And for us, we pride ourselves in really understanding about power and what we are attempting to do and how we're trying to shift power. So I know many of you have heard us reference the Kerwin report from a few years ago entitled Equitable Civic Engagement. Much, if not all, of that report really has served as a foundation for us at Cleveland Votes to understand really what is our center of gravity. What are we trying to do? And there's one quote that we often share, which is fundamentally equitable civic engagement is about leveraging the power dynamics of place, giving voice to those previously alienated and excluded from the civic process. We acknowledge that. We know that there are, particularly for persons of color, barriers, challenges, acts of suppression that don't want to make this process equitable, right? This year alone, we have countless examples of the ways in which our ability to complete the census has been challenged and suppressed. Accessing the ballot, challenged and suppressed. But thankfully, you all have some amazing comrades that you'll hear from here in just a moment, who will talk about not just the barriers, but the ways that they've been able to activate in their respective service areas. So with that, I want to start with just kind of easing ourselves into here and reintroduce the folks that will be serving in this capacity on the panel. For each panelist, I ask that you share your name, the organization that you are representing or affiliated with, along with your position. And then to bring a little bit of levity in, please share what your song or genre, like what's been your vibe this year? I don't know about y'all, but music has been giving me life. Some days I'm crunked up on some like old school Biggie. Other days I'm like smooth John Coltrane, and then other days like I'm vibing out to like Sarah Tavares, right? Like it really does depend on my mood and what I need to feed my soul. But I know having background music has been amazing for me. So I will start by asking Joy to introduce herself, please.
Good morning. My name is Joy Johnson, and I am 2 months into the role of Executive Director at Burten Bell Carr Development. We are the nonprofit community development corporation that serves the Central, Kinsman, and Buckeye neighborhoods. Thank you, Jeff. My song for 2020 is a song by Drake and Future called Big Rings, but the chorus, the hook goes, what a time to be alive. And so, you know, I think 2020, you could say that with different levels of intonation, like, what a time to be alive, or what a time to be alive. Like, some amazing things have happened to me in 2020, and some crazy things have happened to the world in 2020. So that's my song for 2020.
Thank you, Joy. And others, feel free to share in the chat if you got a vibe, if you have a song. I'm always looking for new things to loop into my playlist, so feel free to share. Next, we'll head over to Jeremy.
Thanks, Erika, and hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Taylor. I'm the Director of Community Involvement at Detroit Shoreway Community Development Organization and Cadell Improvement Incorporated. So we serve 3 neighborhoods, the Cadell, Edgewater, and Detroit Shoreway neighborhoods. Jay-Z is always keeping me motivated, looking positively into the future, and always inspiring, you know, that hustle mindset. And so that's what keeps me going. And in particular, the song You Don't Know, it's just an anthem for success. And I really love Jay-Z's got me through some tough times and continuing to keep me looking towards the future positively.
Awesome. Hova. Sorry, you got the New Yorker, so you know I love Jay-Z. Dope. So we'll head over to our Collinwood comrades, Kristian and Krystal.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristian Hunter. I am the Community Engagement Manager for Greater Collinwood Development Corporation. I actually kind of struggled with this question. I agree with Erika. It also just depends on the mood that you're in. But as I went to try to think of something, I thought of Happy by Pharrell Williams, just because, you know, no matter what is going on, you know, I try to stay positive in all of what I do, and, you know, and the help that I try to provide to our residents here. So
thank you, Kristian. I should share this video of my mom dancing to Happy. It brings me tremendous joy. I'm like, Mama, how do you know about Pharrell? But yeah, she was on it last year. Krystal.
Hi, I'm Krystal Sierra, Economic Development Specialist for Greater Collinwood. Like Kristian, I kind of had a little bit of trouble thinking about this. So for genre, I went actually movie genre. So I was thinking, kind of feeling like this year being on the front lines of the pandemic and voter outreach, census outreach. I'm really feeling like a mix between Handmaid's Tale, The Watchmen, and 28 Days Later.
Fire. Yeah, movie soundtracks are amazing. Many of you know Evelyn Burnett. She has Hamilton on like just continuous, like back to back. So yeah, movie soundtracks are amazing. Well, to my neighborhood neighbors, Tremont, we'll head over to Scott and to Dharma.
Hi, Dharma Valentin, Community and Equity Organizer at Tremont West Development Corporation. I'm also a moody music listener, so most mornings I just wake up and listen to metal, which is my mood most mornings. Being a Puerto Rican metalhead is kind of weird, but this summer though, the song of the summer has been from Run the Jewels, Just, and it also has Pharrell Williams featured in it, so it's been really, really good. That's been my summer jam.
Awesome. Scott?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Erika. My name is Scott Rosenstein. I'm the Community Involvement Manager at Tremont West. And as you could see by our mask, we're both, Dharma and I are here at the office sitting a foot apart. But we wanted to be with you today, but I apologize for the mask. But it is really a sign of the times that we're going through with COVID and all the challenges that brings into our lives. I, like Kristian, I think I struggle with the question a little bit, but I'm really inspired by musical theater and also movie soundtracks. And the one that's been inspiring me through this year and even last year pre-COVID has been Hamilton. I'm energized by the music and the performances. I've seen it on stage a couple times, seen the production on Disney, but also the very issues, it reminds me, the issues that we're grappling with today have those roots: systemic racism, oppression, even issues with the Electoral College that even, certainly from the earliest days and even predating the Republic. So they kind of constantly remind me of that, and that, as Lin-Manuel Miranda says, it's the story of America then told by America now. And I find inspiration from that a lot too.
Thank you. I haven't had a chance to share it with you all, but someone just shared with me some Hamilton Get Out to Vote video. So you'll see that later in our meeting. Great inspiration. Thank you all. Just a little get to know everyone. What's everyone's mood? And thank you for everyone who's popping in some songs in the chat. I will definitely save these so I can add it to my rotation. So let's jump in, let's wrap. So I just want to start by just, kind of getting a perspective from you all. Obviously you're here representing your respective organizations, but before we start getting into the meat of what you're doing, I would love to hear, what was that pivotal moment in your life where you felt called to action, right? And it may not be in the current context of the role that you have at your respective CDC, but any memory that you would like to share, and we can just sort of popcorn. So feel free to jump in, panelists. Or I'll call on you, and I will. So you know how that goes.
I'll start because I don't like awkward silences. The first memory that comes to mind, I think I was 7 or 8. We were living on 85th and Central, and I remember learning about recycling. I don't remember where, but the importance of recycling and how could I do it? It was one of those things where I felt empowered, like, okay, this is something I can do to help the earth. But it was beyond me to actually access recycling. This was in the 80s, so there was no sort of curbside or citywide or even drop-off sites for recycling. But I just remember being really frustrated that I wanted to start recycling because now I learned the importance of it, but I didn't have anywhere to go. And I remember looking in the yellow pages for for the younger folks. That's this big, thick book that had information by categories. And so I looked up recycling, and I think I wrote several letters, but I remember writing a letter to Recycling Today. And it was about the importance of recycling. And they responded saying that they appreciated my passion, but they were a recycling magazine. They weren't they weren't a recycling center, but they encouraged me to keep fighting. So I just remember that feeling, that feeling like, okay, I need to petition. I need to talk to somebody to get this thing going. I think that was the spark.
Thank you so much, Joy. that story gave me life. Yeah. And what I heard, there's you couldn't quite figure out the what and how to activate, but it was something that resonated with you. And I think that's really important as we think about how do we engage with folks. People often ask me how do you talk to a voter, who's not interested? And I said, because I don't talk to them about voting. I talk to them about what's important to them. Right? And it's the long game, and that requires time, but you have to get to understand who individuals are and what motivates them, right? So now I know that little old Joy Johnson, way back when, wanted to activate around recycling, right? So that's information, and it's not to be used in a negative way. It's not like, oh, now I have this information about Joy, I'm gonna manipulate her and throw cans on her lawn. I'm not gonna torment her about it. But I know that is something that is of interest to her, right? So if an issue comes up around environmental justice, in my mind, I already know that even though that was many years ago, I'm sure that's something, even if that's not something Joy is doing today, that I might be able to reach out to her, right? So it's really starting from a value proposition of what motivates people. What are they interested in, right? We all have different interests. We all have things that get us riled up. So it's starting from that place of understanding, and then understanding the agency, right? She exhibited agency by saying, like, I'm gonna open these yellow pages and I'm gonna figure this out. And she wasn't discouraged, even though that wasn't the source for her to activate. She was still encouraged to push on. Anyone else would like to share about their pivotal moment?
I can talk about mine. When I first graduated undergrad in 2013, I was working my first job, my first real job, which was insurance. And I just remember sitting at my desk, just feeling like I need to be doing the work that's making a difference, whether it's internally with an individual or whether it's externally with a community. So finding my passion through being an AmeriCorps Vista and working in community development was truly my life calling. Because we work to impact lives on a daily basis. And honestly, this work has taught me the importance of why our vote matters and why being a part of changing our community is so important. I also learned, the importance of local and federal leadership and why the power of voting has effects on the individual, a community, or the whole country. And to be honest, when I first started in community development, and I feel like what a lot of residents are struggle with today is not understanding local leadership or judges or council people and what their actual role is in the community. And I felt like this was my opportunity to be educated, which, just impacted my call to action as a whole, and all of the work that I do.
Thank you, Kristian. And in many ways, Devante often says this: we serve as translators, right? We don't have proprietary information, right? The voter registration deadline is the voter registration deadline. The vote by mail process is the vote by mail process. So it's not that we have information for only us to know, but it's how do you translate and connect that, right? And, I've heard folks, jokingly say, like, I'm so mad about this pothole, I'm gonna call Senator Brown. And I'm like, hate to break it to you, but Sherrod don't want to hear from you about that. I mean, yes, he's in DC and, he's advocating for more resources for our roads, but you need to holler at your council person or your county council person, depending on what that issue is. And it seems small, but you can't really activate if you don't know the I hate using the word target, but like the priority person or the priority body, right? That actually can affect change, right? So that's really important. That's really important. And it's a critical role for each of you as community leaders, is to be able to translate this information in a way that's palpable for people to understand, and it's not overwhelming and it's not confusing. And they know that they can go to Kristian, she's a trusted person in Collinwood, who they can ask those questions in a nonpartisan way. Other folks want to share? If not, I can move on.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Next.
I
think we have two. I'll go next. I have a couple of, activation points. First was the birth of my son. I was 20 years old, young person, and I think that was the first time I started looking outward and what I could do to be a good mom. So family first. The second was probably the death of Tamir Rice. At the time, I was living on 73rd in Detroit, working for Guide to Culture, Bookstore and Press. And I think in 2014, that was the coming of age for a lot of the folks who worked at that particular bookstore. And around that same time, I think a couple months prior, Tanisha Anderson had been murdered by CPD. Prior to that, Eric Gardner. So at that time, there was a lot of protests happening, shutdowns happening, and I think that sort of like formed my outlook and my activism. So yeah.
Thank you, Krystal. And we do, we see a lot of people, an act occurs, more often than not, a horrific act or acts as Krystal just described, and they feel motivated. And we often say, we welcome everyone at any stage that you're in, right? There's no sort of one way to enter into this work of activism. And I think sometimes people get intimidated, like, oh, like I didn't say I was an activist, I'm just going to this protest, or I'm just trying to register people to vote. And I think terms can be disarming sometimes. And I think, you know, similar to work that has been done with our through the REI work with CMP and Third Space and others around like creating this common lexicon, right? And understanding what these terms mean. And it's not to force a role on someone, but a lot of times these roles are interwoven as individuals and then in our respective work at our organizations. Jeremy, you wanted to share?
Yeah, no, I'll just say that my parents is the reason I think I'm geared towards this type of work. And it's when I was 18, my dad, I was a bit of a conspiracy theorist, and my dad told me that that doesn't matter and that people literally, you know, died for my right to vote. And that's like stuck with me the whole time. It's just like the bare minimum of being civically engaged or just is that duty. So I, you know, always looked at voting every single election as just like the thing to do. And, you know, he always talked about, you know, does talk about our forefathers in our family and how they, you know, literally fought and died for just this right to do that one little thing. And then I ended up working on the president's re-election campaign in 2012. And before that, I had no idea what community development organizations were. And shortly after debriefing after that campaign and seeing like the kind of impact that the grassroots power structure of neighborhood leadership teams just really blew my mind. And I always felt that when neighbors get together, they can pretty much make anything they want happen. So I really believe that, and it's great to be able to help you know, empower residents with that type of mindset.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, history and ancestry is really important to bring into this conversation. And, you know, I think contextualizing it for your audience, you know, because, you know, some of the young folk, I'm not in that category anymore, like, okay, I hear you, you know, I know what happened back in the 1960s, you know, but I think it's important for people to understand the historical context, not just the challenges, but the successes, right? There was a time where me as a Black woman could not vote. There was a time that me just as a woman could not vote, right? There were a time when there were, you know, actual poll taxes, you know, so these things are important to understand where we are today. And while there are still acts of suppression, there has been some progress. So I want to move us into the next question. And Jeremy, you sort of teed me up as if you had these questions ahead of time. So thank you. So a few moments ago, I shared about the foundation of Cleveland Vote's theory of change and the importance of equitable civic engagement. And again, just to remind you, it's about leveraging power dynamics of place, giving voice to those previously alienated and excluded from the civic process. I'm curious to hear from the panel, from your lens and perspective, why is it important for you and your organization to be part of this nonpartisan civic engagement movement? I'm gonna pick on Tremont since they weren't able to answer the first question. So here you go, Scott and Dharma.
I think it's really important for me. I've been part of Tremont West for a number of years now. And I realized that the focus from outside the community and sometimes inside the community is kind of on the restaurants, the entertainment, the things that housing starts, things that are important, but also kind of cater to a more affluent audience. Yet Tremont is a tremendously diverse community. We also serve Duck Island and Irish Town Bend. Tremendously diverse, and a lot of people were not being connected. Sometimes the efforts were there, but they fell short. And one of my passions has been with voting. And I know there's 9 precincts in our service area. One of them, I live in one of them that's in the lower 3 of the 9 in terms of voting. So it was really important for me that I began to connect with my neighbors and that we really work that other people have a place and the power to act, and that it not all fall on maybe one zone of the neighborhood, but that other people be engaged, and that it be a more equitable arrangement. And my colleague and others in Tremont West have certainly embraced that. And I think this last year especially has been one of like, let's reach out to areas of our community that probably have been underserved for a long time, and that it's important to connect with them and to get their input and talking. I did want to mention, just jumping back to the first question a little bit, one of my glide paths to this job that I have now has been as a pastor in the United Church of Christ. And that is a very progressive denomination. I'm very proud of their social justice commitments as well. But it also taught me, and continuously teaches me, that I do need to talk to people and listen to people and gain trust. And when you said, Erika, that you don't just go and talk to people about voting, you kind of get to know your neighbors, your and extended friends, and find out what is important to them. What are the issues that they're going through, or what's going on in their life right now that's important, and then those connections can be made with voting.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, no, it's incredibly important. No one wants to be felt or felt as if they're being treated as a transaction, right? None of us want to feel that way. We want to feel valued, that our thought, our perspective, even if we don't agree, is valued. To have that, discursive space, which is often we don't have them. And I think that's the beauty of the work that not just the CDCs on the panel, but many of you are doing, is that we have to create these spaces. There's not very many natural places where we can have these conversations in a non-polarizing way, right? My husband's in education, has taught social studies in high school, and we talk about this a lot, right? It's like, if you're not getting it at home, if you're not getting it in your school, it's not like when I turn 18, like I am given this like welcome packet, which, side note, we want to do if anyone has any funding for that, but it's like, there's no like natural, just like, ta-da, you're 18, here's the civic process and everything you need to know, right? Like, we don't get that, right? So where? It happens in our communities. It happens in, with our neighbors. It happens in conversation, maybe, at our faith-based institutions, or if you're a part of an affiliation. So I think just acknowledging that there are not naturally places where this is happening. So we do have to foster them and create them to, again, not just bring people together to talk about voting or the census, but to bring people to actually build relationships with one another. And through that, they'll feel activated and motivated to be like, oh, okay, because by the way, the election only happens twice a year, maybe 3 if there's a special election, right? So it's like, well, what are we doing to talk about the rest of the the bounds of the year, right? So if all of our energy is just about a day or 2 days in a year, then we're really missing the boat and the opportunity to build relationships. Dharma, was there anything else you wanted to share, either on question 1 or 2?
So I grew up in Tremont a while ago, before it was the Tremont that it is today. So getting hired here 3 years ago, I brought in a different perspective. My family got displaced more or less when I was 13. So we moved to Clark Fulton and set up a community there, and everything was fine. But coming back here was very kind of like shocking. But the inequities were just so vastly apparent to me personally. So there's spaces, like Erika was saying, where I could tell and feel like not welcome, where others were not showing up, did not feel welcome. And so one of the spaces I was trying to, or have been for the past couple of years through programming, have been trying to empower and build a base upon, is Tremont Point. And it has a very wide, vast history there. And you'll get a different story from every resident we speak to there, and it's really interesting. But throughout the year, especially with voting and voter registration and the census and all, we've been trying to build a power base there. So through some of the events lately, we've been identifying leadership potentially there, and hopefully we'll be able to have some representation from Tremont Point, part of the neighborhood that was not really was overlooked, and a lot of people assume they're okay, they're well off, but it is a mixed income community, and there are a lot of residents that have been here for 20 something years and have never really been heard or given a platform. So that's kind of like the work what we're doing now. Things may appear okay on the surface and in parts of Tremont, but the reality is so much more vast. And it takes a while to see the truth. So having some representation from there, hopefully, like maybe eventually on the board even, would be very helpful for us as an organization. So I'm looking forward to building that trust.
Thank you, Dharma. That's so critical, the identification of leaders. We want to share this knowledge. If anyone has heard Devante speak in the last year and a half, we all collectively read this book, New Power, and he quotes it often, right? It's like, we must transfer our knowledge, right? You know, it's no good for me to have information and knowledge and not to share that. And I think for us as a team, you know, our relationships with you all is really the only way we could do this work, right? We're a small and mighty team. As you heard in my bio, I also run a whole other organization, right? So on a day-to-day basis, it's Jennifer, Devante, myself. 3 people could not, you know, realistically be able to have this spider web that we're able to have through the partnerships with you all, and as individual place-based entities, it should be viewed the same way, right? You're still not a huge staff. No one CDC has like hundreds of people working for that CDC. So how can we transfer this knowledge to the residents, right? And create this, you know, sort of domino effect, this spider web of like, it doesn't have to be just Scott and Dharma, you know, who are sharing this information. How do we transfer that individual knowledge and power that we all have to the leaders in our community? Because there are leaders, right? And I think just being honest about like leadership looks different for different people, which segues me into our next question, which is, which term do you most identify with? Is it activist, advocate, change maker, community member, firefighter, freedom fighter, policy worker, resident, or maybe something I didn't say? Like when you think of some of these terms, you know, what resonates with you? Who haven't we heard from in a bit? Joy, we haven't heard from you since you talked about recycling. What you got?
What term resonates with me, or how do I identify myself? Is that the question?
And those are just a few. It may not be that. You may have your own.
I always say dot connector, somebody that connects the dots. And I feel like as a whole, that's the work of a CDC. So we're place-based. We develop the relationships with people. We find out what the people need, and then we connect them to the resources. So I always use our health and wellness work as an example. We built this fancy community kitchen cornucopia place where we can provide the cooking classes and nutrition education, but I am not the one teaching cooking classes because nobody would learn how to cook. But because of relationship building, we can bring in Tri-C, we can bring in St. Vincent Charity Hospital, we can bring in University Hospital, and they provide the education. So I see my role as at a CDC, and I see the CDC's role as a dot connector when it comes to voter engagement and any sort of civic engagement, same sort of thing. I love the terms that you stole from Devante, the translation and the transfer of power. That really does define what we do. And because we've developed these trusted relationships, people come to us when they need things, and we can use that relationship as an opportunity to transfer that knowledge.
Thank you, Joy. The Anthonys have been throwing down during the sheltering at home. So if you need any instructors, you just let me know. We've been going in. I keep saying we should have created a YouTube channel because it's been hilarious. Someone else, Jeremy, Kristian.
Yeah. No, I think with all of the community development organizations, all of our service areas are big, and there's always that kind of tale of two neighborhoods. There's the area where everyone knows when you hear about Detroit Shoreway, a lot of people think about like Gordon Square and Edgewater Beach. And if you think about Ohio City, you think about West 25th. and on and on. And then there's parts of our neighborhood, and so that's what people really think about, but they don't realize that south of Madison Avenue, it's a completely different place. And you have the areas with the haves and the people the residents who really have power. They understand how things work, and they know how to make changes in the neighborhood. And just a couple blocks in another direction, you have an area where residents don't realize their power or feel helpless or hopeless. And it's important to us as an organization. I mean, one, we know where those areas are that need our love and attention. And it's important to us because things like the census directly impact those residents, and it's crucial. It only comes every 10 years. And voter registration is important to us because we get to have those conversations with residents. And I think there was another thing I wanted to say. Oh yes, right. And in terms of like how I personally identify, it's definitely as an advocate, and I love that dot connector, relationship builder, connecting people with resources is something that this pandemic has really given us an opportunity to do. But most importantly, it's that, I think that all of us can agree that there's like the two neighborhoods, and it's important to us to be able to work with the residents in the neighborhoods that don't have that same level of power, where they do feel hopeless or helpless or frustrated even, and being able to engage with them is really important to us.
Thank you, Jeremy. If anyone has read any of Malcolm Gladwell's books, particularly The Tipping Point, he talks about mavens, connectors, and salespersons. And Jennifer Devante and I often laugh because we all kind of have a little bit of each of those, which I think makes us a really great team to work together. But that connector role is at the core, of what you all are doing, and really important to connect with people. And that starts with the trust, right? Krystal or Kristian, did you have anything to share?
Yes, I have something to share. So I actually definitely relate to that dot connector, just working here at the 5 Point Community Center, because that's pretty much our hub for any type of engagement or resources that service our community. So if we don't have a program or something in-house, we are trying to find a way to support our residents. As far as another role that kind of I identify myself with as the change maker role, just because I try my best to promote positive change in our communities that we serve. And also at the beginning of my career in community development, I created a series known as Kicking It with Cops. And it's a series of fun community engagement events such as kickball with cops, cleaning with cops, cooking with cops, or crafting with cops. And this series was my attempt to create change in the police and community relations, and also a way to kind of break down barriers. But although there's ongoing tension between police and community, I also believe that there's power in positive interactions that can effectively create change or start that process.
Thank you, Kristian. So just reminder to please start putting your questions in the panel, or excuse me, please start putting your questions for the panelists in the chat. We're going to do a couple more questions, and then we're going to open the floor at about noon to start to hear from you all with your questions. So I do want to spend the next few minutes getting into the specific strategies and what you all have done, not just this year maybe, but as it pertains to your nonpartisan engagement. So please provide an example or a couple of small examples of what you have done to engage your residents, and talk a little bit about why you felt it was effective or why it worked, and anything you may have learned or garnered from that engagement. So we'll start with Tremont because we haven't heard from you all in a few moments.
One thing that initiative that is largely resident based, and I'm kind of the staff liaison, although I'm also a resident of the neighborhood, has been something that we called Our Neighborhood Votes, or Nuestro Vecindario Vota. And it was a way particularly to encourage folks to vote. As Jeremy said, there's kind of like the power structure of a neighborhood, but then there's a lot of somewhat disconnected portions of the neighborhood. And we found that that played out in voting, that folks that might have felt disaffected or alienated or marginalized, it was reflected in their voting rates. So we began before the midterm elections in 2018 and saw a real upturn in voter participation during that off-year election. Was not so active last year, but kicked into gear again this year. Had to adjust to all the things and challenges that COVID brings. We couldn't be doing door knocking or some of the hands-on things. But I'm proud. We actually started back with voter registration in late July. And we built, last week we did 19 separate events for voter registration. And we have 20 more events slotted between today and next Monday, the voter registration deadline. And it's really been good to hear people's stories, and some first-time voters that have never voted before that are excited and feel energized and have a sense of power that they haven't had before. So it's challenging. We found at first we got less volunteers because people were intimidated with COVID than we had in 2018. But then the energy has really built, particularly in the last couple of weeks. So I feel like it's just a portion of building that equitable community. But it's an important connection, I think.
Thank you, Scott. Those first-time voters get me every time. I get a little teary-eyed. It is really an honor. It's one thing to update or register, or update someone's voter registration, but I too have had the opportunity this year, this cycle particularly, to register some new voters, and it means a lot. Others, please share, what strategies have you been working on either this year or in the past?
I don't know if it's so much of a strategy, but with us, the pandemic was a huge challenge for everyone, but it also created like an opportunity for us to do something completely different and get out of our comfort zone a little bit. And the strategy is just like going, again, we know that there's two parts of the neighborhood, and going to the part that we want to empower residents the most, and then collaboration with a lot of different organizations, and not making something just about registering people to vote or completing the census, but making opportunities for people to have a little bit of fun, socially distanced. And also the face mask gave out this big opportunity to give people something. So, thanks to Math for Community and Esperanza Threads and a lot of different organizations that helped us get, I think almost 3,000 face masks out into our community, and like having those conversations with people, whether they want to wear the face mask or not somewhere else down the line, but still there's that touch point through being in the community at like a gas station or a convenience store or a park, and having pop-ups, outreach pop-ups where you have art kits for kids from like Upcycle Part Shop, or people helping them do the census right then and there, census coloring books and all sorts of stuff. I think that like having a lot of different, and then, I'm sorry, I didn't even mention the free food. A lot of free food from our residents, or our local businesses was donated over the course of this pandemic. And the strategies being out in the community consistently with a lot of different types of resources for rental assistance, utility assistance through the city of Cleveland. And then also, yeah, we can register you to vote and help you do the census right here, right now. Oh, you want to vote by mail ballot? We got you covered. So, I mean, having all those different things where people don't feel like they're just being pressured to have that transaction of registering them to vote has been really helpful. And then getting their phone numbers has been another thing that we really, a strategy that we really focus on, so we can follow up with them later.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think a couple things that I heard from that. One is just the practicality. right? I think sometimes we can overthink strategies, right? And we want to be practical, right? What is the core of your business? What is the core mission of what your entity is doing? And how can you begin to embed and pair? Those are kind of the ways that we're encouraging. It doesn't have to be additive, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to create this whole new thing on top of the 40 other things I got going on. Like, that's not realistic. Let's be for real about time, energy, capacity, all of that, right? So how can we pair and embed these practices, right? You know, you are place-based entities, right? You have services, you're serving as dot connectors, right? So what if you're handing out an application for, you know, utility assistance, it doesn't hurt just to have a voter registration with that, right? So it's really thinking practically, and that doesn't mean that we don't want innovative and fun and exciting things. But the other thing I did hear was fun, right? Like, you know, democracy is not all doom and gloom. Again, we can't have that conversation on my porch, but there is joy in democracy. There is something to be celebrated, right? And we have to be the beacon of hope, right? Like for real, y'all. Because if we're not, you know, we're not going to get our community energized and ready to be activated. So being practical, embedding these, pairing, you know, different activities with voter engagement or census in the last year, and then be responsive, right? Mass for Community came together because Chanel, who formerly was with the Trust for Public Land, called me and like 3 other people and said, like, people need masks. Should we do something? Okay, let's do it, right? Like it literally was organized over text message, right? And we submitted some grants, we got some resources, and we delivered 77,000 kits to our community, right? So, you know, just being practical, you know, we wanted to do more, of course, right? We would love to have sanitizer for everybody, gloves for everybody, but this is what we were able to do. And we knew that it was going to be additive and helpful, practical, right? We want everyone to be safe. It is hard to do this work. As we see, I know y'all can't wait, Scott and Dharma, to get off this panel so you can take off your mask. Like, it is hard. I did a 4-hour event the other day, and like, it is hard to do this work with masks, right? So just being realistic about the challenges is a physical challenge, but we know that that is critical to maintaining the safety of ourselves and that of our residents. So having practical things for them to come to and get, you know, whether that's food, you know, food insecurity is a challenge pre-COVID and only got exacerbated more through COVID. So those pairings with those activities are really helpful. So before we transition to all of your questions, just anything else folks want to share? I mean, what has 2020 taught you? We heard Scott say a little bit about, you know, the challenges with getting volunteers. You know, we have seen this as a challenge also, and, you know, no judgment, right? Everybody wants to be safe and we respect that wholeheartedly. But what else has 2020 taught you as it pertains to equitable civic engagement, whether it's now and you're applying it now or how you envision applying it in the future?
I'll go ahead and jump in, Erika. I think if 2020 has taught me anything, and COVID has taught me anything, is that as far as relationship building with people who might be hard to reach, like, we have to be on the ground. We have to be talking to people. We have to be connecting and reconnecting and trying to reach people that we don't already have a relationship with.
Thank you. So critical, right? So it's like we're building a foundation and we're continuing to grow from that foundation, which is why, to Jeremy's point a moment ago, you know, collecting those phone numbers, right? So you have that ready-made list that you can activate, not just for this upcoming election, but for other activities that you all are doing. I know we worked with Kristian during the primary, and maybe for the election, everything's kind of gray, if I'm being honest, around like how to activate the list that Collinwood has, right? So some of you already have that, you know, some of you are partnering with us to participate in things like Outvote and Through Talk, but it's really critical to have the method to communicate so that you can get these messages out to folks. Anyone else, lessons learned this year and how you're going to continue to translate this work?
This is a shameless plug. This is not a lesson learned. We've utilized WOVU 95.9 FM. It's our community radio station. OVU stands for Our Voices United. So while we are a small, low-power FM station. We broadcast on the internet as well. So please share all of these events that you all are talking about. We have been doing lots of PSAs and got grants to support voter registration events. And so we would love to continue to share that.
We love coming on your radio. Thank you, Joy. Others, what have you learned this year?
I think it's also important building connections with friends and allies in nearby neighborhoods as well. This has brought us together, you know, with my colleague Selena Pagan and Metro West and the Young Latino Network. And we've actually been able to partner on some voter registration drives and work together or kind of complement each other's work and whatever is going on. And I think that that's been pretty amazing. Also, I've just seen what 2020 has taught me is that we're more adaptable and flexible than we really think we are. I mean, all of us, I do, complain about things or want things to seem more normal. But I've also learned that there's a lot of really cool ways to go about things that I would have never thought of before, or ideas that I hear from other people about how they're just coping with everyday life in ways of building connections and reaching out to neighbors and things that we wouldn't have done because we were so set in the rut of doing things the way they've always been done. And 2020 has shown that we're pretty adaptable people. Even if we complain about it, we can still find ways to connect.
I feel that 2020 has also shown us all how much of a digital divide there really is in some communities. So it's like right now, we're all fortunate enough to be able to convene here and gather and build our own community and capacity and network. However, like we also view like, oh my God, there's parts in the area we have to go door to door still. We have to, you know, connect with those neighbors in person and still be safe. So it really made it apparent, like some parts, you know, in the city in general are just not connected at all. And it's great to see that there are organizations like Digital C popping up now and becoming more relevant and coming into our neighborhoods to provide that service. So that's something I learned.
No, that's huge. And that translates, you know, beyond democracy building. We're seeing this with obviously our education and access for our students or the youth who are virtually being taught. And I think that for us too was a huge lesson. It's not that we weren't engaging digitally before COVID, but definitely ramped up a lot in that capacity, but understanding and acknowledging that it's a both and, which is why place-based institutions such as yourselves is so critical, right? We can have these convenings as we're having right now, but we know that's not accessible for everyone. Even in Glenville, Third Space has been partnering with us to host these biscuit and democracy events. And every event without fail, we have to use our individual hotspots to power the computers because the Wi-Fi is just like not working, right? It's just like, every time, like they've talked to their AT&T and all this stuff, and it's just like, it just doesn't. And we always have to use a hotspot, right? So we have that, right? And I think also just acknowledging the privileges that we do have and be grateful for those, but just know and acknowledge that's not going to translate everywhere for everyone. And we have to be cognizant of that. In addition to the digital divide, the language divide, right? You know, we have neighborhoods that are, you know, more dominant in non-English speakers. So being cognizant of that, being cognizant of individuals with hearing impairments or sight impairments, right? And it feels a little overwhelming, but that's part of knowing your constituents, right? And making sure that those things are accessible. So, you know, if you are having a Zoom like this, you know, could closed caption be added, right? Or could you at least ask participants ahead of time, you know, are there any impairments that we should be aware of? And, you know, to the best of our ability, we'll make those accommodations. So just being aware of that diversity. So thank you all. I'm going to pause here and look to Colleen and Melinda. I'll start looking at the chat, but see if we have any questions coming in from our attendees.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say we do. There's a question in the chat from my friend, Nicole McGee, and it's a great question. Can curious about ways our panelists are practicing their own self-care to do this work. It's important, and a lot of times in this industry, not just in democracy building or civic engagement, we have a tendency to put this work ahead of our own health and our own mental health. So any strategies that you all are employing to keep yourself sane that you would love to share with this group?
I'll go ahead and go. I am currently watching all, I think, 9 seasons of Seinfeld. So it's pretty awesome just to have a little laugh for 20 minutes or however long you want to watch. Definitely TV for me.
That was my husband early in the COVID. He restarted, started Seinfeld again.
I've been watching 15 seasons of Top Chef, and that's been helpful. Just get my mind off of things, but also just exercise, family, cooking, trying to stay connected and stay safe.
Anyone else?
I'll just add that in coming into this new role, I realized what I did for self-care before isn't sufficient. I feel a different kind of fatigue. So I was interested in hearing, other ideas for self-care, because my normal isn't cutting it anymore.
Also, virtual yoga has been giving me life. I did not think I would enjoy virtual yoga. So it's a studio actually in Tremont. And pretty soon after, like probably late March, early April, my husband and I started. And I literally said to our instructor yesterday, like, I hope you keep a hybrid model, because I can literally hang up a call at 4:59 and be on my mat in my living room at 5, right? And like, I'm doing almost like 4 to 5 classes a week. I know hands down, if I had to like physically go to the studio, I'd be lucky if I get 1 or 2 in, right? So I think, yoga, or there's so many virtual physical activity, both free and paid. And I think for me, I have to be intentional. So Joy, it's like when you look at your schedule for the week, you have to, like, I've done noon classes, which give me life, because it's like that jolt I need to get through the rest of the day. And it forces me for like an hour in the middle of the day, because we all know we're not working 9 to 5, right? So like me taking an hour in the middle of the day, I feel completely in my right space to do that. But I think the intentionality is critical. Like, you have to think of your self-care just as important as your meetings and your work, and carve that out. And that has worked for me. Is like, no, I am signing up for this yoga, and I'm actually going to be in there, and I'm actually going to hang out with you at 4:59, because I got to get on my mat. And I tell people, got to get on my mat. Talk to you later.
Yeah, just thanks for that question, Nicole. That's I wish I had a good. Now I'm going to have to start thinking about that more, because I got that's very real. With the pandemic, all my biking, cooking, and going to the gym have all gone out the window. So thanks for everyone's suggestions. This is inspiring, Erika. Internet yoga, virtual yoga.
Come join me on the mat, Jeremy. Come join me on the mat. I'll send you a link.
Erika, I have a question for our panelists, and for those that are involved in this work, feel free to add in. There's a hyper attention, as there should be, to this work right now because of the census and because of this incredibly critical election, probably the most important in my lifetime, our lifetime. My question is, though, how do we keep this going? How do you keep this going? How have your organizations embedded this in their strategic plans? There I go, talking CDC world, but in their culture, that this work of community and civic engagement is literally the bedrock of community development. Scott knows this from our time together in Tremont. When we would host annual meetings and I would get up and speak as the executive director, it was no secret that folks like Scott, and then eventually Dharma, or Michelle, or Catherine, or you name it, who was a community organizer, got the most applause, because they're the ones that the community knows. Again, how do you keep this going after the election, and what are your organizations doing to make it more part of the culture?
For us, I've seen, I mean, community and equitable engagement is something that's just going to have to be built in. And so continuing to do outreach, particularly in more marginalized parts of our neighborhood, is just going to have to be something that we include beyond an election year or beyond the census time. Specifically with voting, though, when we began in 2018, we came up with a yard sign campaign called Our Neighborhood Votes. And the signs were really embraced by residents across our neighborhoods and adopted by a couple of other nearby neighborhoods as well. And so realizing that there's off times and off years with elections, you don't always have that energy. But having those signs, signs don't vote, but having those signs as a reminder to people throughout the neighborhood that there are ways of staying engaged, and we don't have them up 24/7 year round, but at various points in the year the signs reappear, and it serves as a kind of reminder and a shared commitment that we need to participate, we need to work together on that. And that's been a nice theme and a very non-threatening one.
Yeah, and that's a really great question, Colleen. I mean, this is a very different year. It's something like we've never seen in our lifetimes, where you have not only the census, a really big election, but then a pandemic. And it has been, going back to that whole self-care thing, I mean, it has been a labor of love, registering people to vote at this magnitude, and also, encouraging and helping people take the census. And what I'll say is that, we're going to be really looking at like how we can collaborate and increase our partnerships to continue doing this work. And I think where community development organizations, really excel, again, is like kind of like shepherding those trusted voices from the community, the residents in the community who live in those areas, who realize the power of civic engagement, and really empowering them. And we shepherd those residents' information and know how to communicate with them and contact them. And I think that that's really what community development organizations bring to the table, is that we know who the residents are that are the movers and shakers, and where the areas are where people can have the biggest impact, or other organizations can have a huge impact. And I think that that's what we're looking at towards the future. And then also, just being a really good partner when it comes to these type of efforts in the future.
And I would like to piggyback off of Scott. We've also started a yard sign campaign in our neighborhoods as well. Out of this, we were able to create, which will be our ongoing voter outreach campaign, which is called Collinwood Counts. So it actually falls within the census, and then also our vote counts. So we are going to continue that, and then with that, we also have a local business pledge, because when it comes to Equitable Civic, and be able to tap all pieces of our communities, because we can't do all the dots when it comes to our community. So we have our local business pledge. So every year or every election term, we are expecting to continue that work going with our businesses to be able to reach residents that we aren't able to reach through the events or the different projects that we do. And also, Krystal, if she would like to say something, but just the power in building those relationships, and also just being on the ground.
Yeah, I can definitely jump in a little bit to talk about that, because a lot of the work that I'm doing is relationship based, whether it's small business owners or like workforce development programming. And I think looking at barriers to employment or barriers to growth for small businesses, and really taking a look at that through the racial lens, it's an opportunity for us to continue civic engagement. So if we're registering people for a jobs program, we might take down their phone number and also check their voter registration. That can happen throughout the year. So I think we're really thinking about embedding voter outreach through all of our kind of outreach efforts, whether it's something that we're doing or that we're partnering in. So.
Cleveland Votes, we're not going anywhere, so holla. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely, we learn with our partners. So like what has been said already, we have learned a lot this year, working in partnership with folks throughout the entire city. I think our encouragement is always to pause and think about how your practices are reflective of those that you are working on behalf of. As I said, when we started, really applying that racial equity lens, understanding some of the challenges that we've talked about, like digital divide or language challenges, things of that nature. I think the intentionality, and I think, outside of the election time, going back to the core of what your mission is as organizations, right? So what are the issue areas that you're seeking to engage, and how can you begin to transfer that power so that not only you are serving as advocates on a specific issue, whether it's, diversification of housing or access to equitable employment or things of that nature, but how do you begin to transfer that knowledge to the residents or to your constituents so that they can be active participants? They're not just consuming the information, but they are also activating themselves. I think is really important. And I think to the initial question that Colleen posed, it should be embedded in every aspect of how you are looking to engage your constituents, right? Whether you're a CDC or another, sort of place-based entity or engaging with folks in the community. This is long-term work. Colleen might remember this a couple years ago at CMP. Mark Joseph said during a meeting one time, we are looking to address and undesign and undo, century-old issues, right? So, we have to also be patient, but have a level of urgency also. Right. So it's not just like, oh, we'll figure it out. No, like there is urgency there also, but being thoughtful and just acknowledging that, like, yeah, we're trying to undo a lot of systemic challenges in our communities. So just being aware of that and creating those, again, generative spaces for people to talk through how they can activate the most. So I know we're getting close to time. We have about 10 minutes left. Any other questions in the chat, Colleen, we might have missed?
I do not see that we've missed any, Erika. I could be wrong. If we've missed your question, please feel free to jump in.
I think one just came in.
Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and read it. Many Cleveland neighborhoods, block clubs, et cetera, have been successful at mobilizing around specific projects that are planned in communities, such as new housing projects, bike lanes. Put differently, it often seems that organizing focuses on issue to address at City Hall, but often the more substantive effects on our neighborhoods and how public resources are distributed, stem from decisions that are being made at the state and federal level. Is there a space for local engagement to affect change at this level? Great question. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
I'll start to maybe take a stab at it. I think part of what we've seen through COVID and even maybe out of Cleveland Foundation is like these bigger foundations are soliciting community input and asking for that. And so I think our job as CDC is to help, I guess, translate that for our residents. Like, what does that mean? Like, why are they asking me to participate in this? Things like Cleveland Foundation is going to the state and can, that advocacy at the state level can have an effect at the community level.
So another shameless plug. I am on the board. I'm sorry, Krystal, were you still talking or were you done? Did I cut you off?
No, you're fine.
You sure? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm on the board of the Ohio CDC Association, which is the statewide organization for all of the community development institutes. And that one of its goals is advocacy. And so it does a great job of identifying state and federal issues and then engaging its members across the state to get involved. But we have decided that we want to be even more intentional and really think about how to mobilize groups of residents from both, Block clubs and urban areas, but also rural areas, and really get them more involved in state and federal issues. So right there with you.
And I would just say, understand your intention, right? It's all interconnected. So as you know very well, Chris, who posed the question, everything translates down, right, from our federal, state to our local level. So I think it's being clear on what is the intent, what does it mean to engage residents to activate at the state or federal level, and then tap into the existing assets, right, that we have. So, obviously I'm a former employee of Neighborhood Progress. So my predecessor or the person that succeeded me, Stephanie McHenry, talked to her. We have, great capacity at partner organizations in our community, such as Enterprise Community Partners. I know many of you know and probably work with Emily Lundgaard. So I think, having intentionality about what you are seeking, and then start from an asset standpoint, right? So what assets do we have as far as knowledge and information for us to begin to start this conversation, and then identify the methods for us to activate, because there are a lot and it can become overwhelming for sure. So we just want to be intentional about what that activism looks like.
Erika, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and bring us to a close. What can I say other than Joy, Kristian, Krystal, Scott, Dharma, Jeremy, thank you for sharing this wealth of information, for agreeing to be leaders, to continuing to be leaders in the work of community engagement, for inspiring those that joined us today, for lifting the work of your colleagues all around the city. We could have had a 20-person panel for all of the work that's happening in every nook and cranny of this city. But for your participation today, I say thank you. And Erika, what can I say? I adore you. I'm inspired by you. I look to you for guidance, and I thank you for answering this call, for being or agreeing to be the moderator of today's conversation. Folks, look for information and announcements on future progress talks, as well as workshops that we'll be hosting as part of Progress Institute 2020, which will actually creep into 2021, but that's okay. And again, thank you to Melinda and Pam for helping to organize today's event. And with that, I wish you all a fabulous afternoon, a wonderful evening, and a safe and happy week. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.